Welcome to the School Leadership Show. I'm Mike Dowdy. This is the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders realize their potential, advance their careers, and achieve work-life balance. We bring together the greatest minds from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. This is the show we wish we had 20 years ago. This show is about you. We're here to help you become the best school leader you can be while still having a life outside of work. In this episode, I interviewed Dr. Stephane Evergreen, author of the book Presenting Data Effectively. She has worked across all sectors, including education, teaching and coaching people about how to communicate using data. We talk about what great presenters do, tips on creating good slides, how your visuals should complement your personality when you present, and more. We barely scratched the surface in this interview, and you are going to want to hear more from Stephane. Her website is stephaneevergreen.com, and you can go there to learn more about her book, read her blog, and listen to her podcasts. Enjoy this interview with Dr. Stephane Evergreen. I'm here with Dr. Stephane Evergreen. And just in full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of Stephane Evergreen. So if you could tell listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and your work with Evergreen Data.
Sure. Well, I'm probably actually pretty similar to you. I mean, I really started out as a teacher. I was an elementary teacher for many years, and then I became like a teacher researcher, and then now I teach researchers. So somehow that's like the evolution that happened for me. But so I got my doctorate in research and did a lot of education research. Really, basically, I just became a really big data nerd. But then I was going out to like conferences and wanting to hear from my fellow data nerds, and I found myself so unable to pay attention to what they were saying because of how badly their slides were presented, and how the graphs looked and all of that. So that got me into what I do now, which is basically helping people figure out how to communicate effectively about their data, because there's a lot of good content out there, and we just want to make sure that people can understand it.
And we've all sat through those mind-numbing presentations with data. And
so many of them, yes.
And I feel like I need to confess, when I was a principal, I think I gave some of those presentations, but I'm better now.
I was a teacher, I did too. Yeah, I mean, we all have those skeletons in our closet of those really bad presentations that we once did. And honestly, for most of us, presenting is like the last thing we think about. We've got a whole lot of day-to-day work running schools or running districts, and it's just not at the forefront of our mind, but the thing is, it really should be.
Well, and that kind of leads me into some of my questions for you today, because this podcast is really designed to give practical advice to aspiring and practicing school administrators. And, these days it really is. It's all about data and data-driven decision-making in schools. And, we've both seen those presentations go horribly wrong. So, what makes a great data presenter stand out? What are some of the things that people do that work?
Yeah, great question. So the things that I see that really make it work are when the information has been digested, meaning we don't show just like a big table of numbers on a slide, because no one wants to look at that. No one can make sense of patterns that are in a table of numbers. It's just like too much information for our brains to process at once. So good data presentations have digested that table of information into some kind of graph that will be visual, since we can understand that visual so much more, and then not just like any kind of default Excel graph, but something that really tells the point that the speaker is trying to make. So digested is one thing. I would say another one is that good presentations match the audience's care. And I mean, like, the presenter really thinks about, what does this audience want to know about? What does this audience really care about? Because you would give a different presentation to your fellow superintendents than you would to parents. I mean, there would be just nuances and differences in the things that you would say and how much detail you would show and graphs and all of those considerations. So really like talking at the level of where the audience cares. And I think one more thing that makes people stand out is really clean and clear visuals.
Yeah, that's something I've tried to work with administrators on too. Is just because the slide software puts the graph small and in the middle of the screen, it doesn't mean it has to stay there.
Right. Yes. Well, and breaking out of those defaults is something people just don't even really think about.
Right. And now, and that kind of leads me to my next question. What are some of the craziest missteps that you've seen people do, or maybe that you've done in presenting data?
Well, I'll never admit to any of my own. Just kidding. Totally. I've done all of these. I think the things that I see the most, especially, I work a lot with school districts and ISDs and teacher centers, and everywhere I go, I see a couple of pretty common things that only education people seem to do.
Oh, I can't wait.
And yeah, and one is the worst clip art ever. I mean, the rest of the world, most other industries have moved on from clip art time, but it is in education that I still see little cartoon person sitting at a desk.
And
just terrible.
And that amazes me, because when you think about education, we have so many stories to tell, and it's all about kids, and you could use pictures of kids.
Yes, I mean, and oftentimes you actually have consent to take the pictures of the kids. And yes, I would love to see them used more, but so often I just see the terrible 80s clip art. And I think another thing I see, honestly, everywhere in education is how much people love Comic Sans as a font.
Oh no!
Yes, it's an epidemic in the education field. Maybe more at the elementary level, but people think it's like approachable and friendly, and like a kid wrote it or something. And I'm just like, no, because those two things, clip art and cutesy looking fonts like Comic Sans, those two things kill credibility.
Absolutely.
And the education field has a hard enough time getting people to take it seriously, even though it's full of people with multiple degrees. There's still always this legitimacy issue that the education field has to combat. So what we don't want to do is kill what we're trying to say with cutesy little pictures and cutesy little fonts.
So no clip art. And then
No clip art.
What are you going with these days for a font? So let's get real nerdy. What are you looking at these days?
Let's get real nerdy. What are my favorite fonts? I like really nice, clean sans serifs. And if you look in your drop-down menu in PowerPoint or Word or even in Excel, you will see many of them because they will have the word sans often in the name of the font. And those are just going to be really nice and crisp and clean and clear, especially for presenting on slides or in graphs.
So sans serif for the screen, and then what I've read says go for serif on paper. It makes it easier to read.
That's totally true. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's totally true. We have to think about how much we're actually going to want people to be, how much we expect people to be reading. Because sometimes the best way to communicate to people is not with something lengthy.
Well, and that's a great, it's kind of a great point, is that it's really about choices. So if somebody says give a presentation, you may or may not want to use slides. I mean, right? Right.
Yes, exactly. Lots of options. And I'm seeing really, really cool, innovative options coming out these days where people, of course, there's always the traditional report. That's definitely an alternative to a slideshow, something that's longer, that has narrative in it. It gives you room to tell stories. So there's definitely some benefit to having a report. But I've been seeing people go with much shorter, I would call them memos, maybe 5 to 6 pages long, really graphic in nature, very visually engaging, where you have maybe room to tell 1 or 2 stories, and then you have room for several graphs, and it's just not going to be as extensive as a full report, but it's a little bit more than just a couple slides,
So it's somewhere between an infographic and a full report. That kind of idea.
So speaking of infographics, we're seeing tons of infographics these days. Tons of dashboards, which are just such a great way to get a lot of information conveyed on one page that can be really visually engaging. Kind of anything that you can think of, we can now produce. We have at least the permission to produce. So again, really it comes back to what does this audience need and care about, and then we go with a page length that is appropriate for that.
And since you are an expert and a guru. Do you often get referred to as a guru?
I do.
You do.
Yes.
Okay. We're gonna use
It's
your
so weird.
guru-ness right here. So, how about
Okay.
you give people permission to sort of get past the idea that whatever's projected on the screen has to be exactly what's handed out. Like,
Mm.
can your handout be different from what's on the screen?
It can and should be different from what's on the screen. And so permission hereby granted to do something different. But people really don't want the slides. And I know that it's a tough thing. People are like, but wait, I do want the slides. No, you really don't. I mean, we all have those slides that are like, 40 pages stapled together that are in file folders and filing cabinets that we're never going to look at again because it's just not helpful. Doesn't have like the readability to it that we would need to go use that information later. So what's better is if we have like a handout, and it could be 2 pages front and back at most if you need to, where you kind of summarize all of your main points. You put references and URLs and things that you don't want people to have to copy off of the slide. And then they have something really nice and succinct. The handouts that I distribute with my slides, people post on the wall of their office. And that's never going to happen when we just distribute our slide deck to people.
Right. Wow. And I just think of all those people who just print off those millions of pages of just dense text that you're right, nobody ever looks at again.
And all those trees that we killed. Come on.
I've
Yes.
I've tried
So,
I've tried experimenting with, making the handout electronic, and you give people the link or the QR code. That way when they go get it, the links that you put in the handout are hot and useful. But what I've struggled with is sometimes there's people in the audience are like, "No, I want the paper." So
mhm.
how do you manage that? Do you just say too bad, or do you give the paper out?
I would say it's good to have a couple copies of your handout on paper. But I would try to drive most people online, obviously, because then when they're already on your site, you can direct them around to look at other things. And the paper kind of, is a little bit less extensive in that way. So, but there will be those people who really do prefer paper for quite some time, and that's okay to give them a couple copies.
How about, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit. I've come back to slide design, but let's talk a little bit about what the presenter actually does. So you were an elementary school teacher. I was an elementary school teacher. When you teach little kids, it's all about engagement and well, all kids and all people, but you have to move quickly from one thing to another. You have to do things that keep people's attention. Otherwise, chaos ensues. So what are some of the things that you do with audiences to help keep people engaged?
Well, honestly, the stuff I learned here, I totally stole from the field of education, from my own training in there, and the research that we have on what makes a good presentation comes from research done inside classrooms. So it's really your audience is best suited for this kind of stuff anyway. But one of the things that we should always do when we're starting the presentation is to kind of hook people in some way with something that's going to like kind of jostle their mind a little bit, shake them up a little bit, and get them to pay attention, like an interesting question or an engaging visual or a quick game or something like that will get people kind of hooked in and ready to see more. And then the research is around attention and like human brains says that we can listen for about 10 minutes before something needs to change, before their brains need to switch up or they'll start dazing out on us. So changing the speaker or asking a question to the audience or starting an activity or something like that. But about 10 minutes of lecture is the most that we can get away with now. So I usually involve some open-ended questions to the audience for, starting a little bit of discussion or having them critique a slide or some low-level load of like small group activities that we'll do. But something like that, mixing a lot of those things helps people stay engaged.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even trying to look for opportunities to get people moving around. Because
Yes. I think that varies by audience, to be honest with you. I think that education people don't mind moving, but a lot of people in other industries are like, do not make me get up out of my seat. So I kind of
really,
think you have to know like who your audience is. Yeah.
like
Yep. That's true.
you're thinking business or government, like what kinds of other areas?
Alm- Almost everyone except education would
That's great.
rather not move, to be honest with you. Yeah, and that reminds me of another, going back to handouts for just a second. I tell this to people all the time. Instead of giving a handout that is already filled in with all of your main points on it, one strategy I often use is to kind of give a blank handout. It'll maybe just have like topic headings and then the URLs and something like that. But it's kind of like a fill in your own handout with a lot of blank space to take notes. And that works really well in education audiences because you're a crowd that needs to move. You got to be doing something all the time. So writing out the notes in the handout is really good for that kind of an audience. You send that to a group of CEOs, they have absolutely no tolerance for filling out their own notes. You just need to give them the finished handout.
Really?
So those audience differences can come into play with the handout too.
Wow, that's fascinating because I've been just giving presentations in education so long, I haven't even considered it outside. Wow. When we talk about presenting data, we often think about just the kind of stand and deliver presentations that we've been talking about. Now, you mentioned the report or the short memo, and in your book, you write about different modalities. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways to get the point across other than slides?
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter which way you approach it, like as we said, there's such a wide variety of formats that you can deliver your information. But I guess for me, it's always user first. Like, what does this audience need to know, and how can I tell them that they're going to really care? And then my recommendation is usually that we approach it by putting the bottom line first, so that we tell people right away, whether it's in a report or whether it's in a presentation or whether it's in a brochure, we tell people right up front the bottom line. Here's the secret. Here's our findings. Here's our strengths and weaknesses this year. But we tell them right up front so that whenever people check out, like mentally check out, they've already got the main point.
So so do not bury the lead. Start right out.
Say that again.
Don't bury the lead. Just
don't bury the lead. Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yes. And I think most of us who are trained up through academia are taught the opposite. We're thinking of the college paper format or the journal article format, where it's background, literature review, methods, section, and all of this stuff before you get to the findings. And then we've killed people with their boredom before we get to the good stuff. So it just suggests we kind of slow down and start with the findings or recommendations or whatever it is that we need to really communicate, and then go backwards from there.
And that makes complete sense when you think about it, and especially when you consider people's attention spans and the fact that a lot of them are going to check out within the first 10 minutes.
That's right. So no matter when they leave, no matter when that phone call comes in that pulls them away, they've heard all the big points.
So how would you recommend that school leaders who want to improve their skills with presenting data, what would you recommend that they do? What are some resources out there?
Yeah, well, so the mantra that I tell people is simplify and then emphasize. So you simplify out all the default junk from the graph. You take out tick marks, you take out grid lines, you take out borders, you simplify out all of that stuff. And then you add a few things back in to emphasize the point, like the title could be your point, or you can use action colors inside the graph on certain bars or data points to emphasize those so that they really can help you tell your story. So you take out the junk that gets in the way, all that noise and clutter, and then you emphasize with a few words and with action colors so that the graph really tells the story. And I do have a resource I can point to on this. I put out a data visualization checklist that kind of addresses every single little bit of the graph and how you can simplify or emphasize it to best capture your story. So that's available for free for anybody from my website. And there are a few other blog posts I've written that I think are really helpful when you're communicating data. And maybe I should have brought this up earlier, but for example, instead of say showing a line graph of reading scores for 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, that would be a line graph that has 4 lines on it, and it could be a little complicated for people who aren't data graph literate. Um, Instead of showing just the whole original thing, if you put that graph into PowerPoint, you can animate the graph so that it just shows one line at a time. And that lets you talk about, the ninth grade graduation rate all that you need to before anybody gets confused about all the other lines that are on there.
And
And then each grade gets its own due diligence.
and that's a great point, because if you put up too much information, people are invariably reading ahead. And if your point is to emphasize certain things, you want to control where they're paying attention.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think at one option is that they're reading ahead, and another option is they get overwhelmed and they check out. And we can prevent both of those things if we just control the way that the data appears on the slide using PowerPoint's animation tools. And I have a blog post on that too, so people can see what that's talking about.
And your blog post is at stephanieevergreen.com.
It's at Stephanie Evergreen. That's right. Yep. And there's this search bar on there, so you can just type in any of those keywords, and you'll see it.
And you're doing a podcast too, monthly, right?
Yeah, I've got a podcast with John Schwabish called the Rad Presenters Podcast, and it's really intended to help people who are intermediate presenters become super stellar. Like, for the folks who already know not to put clip art on their slides, they're putting pictures of real kids. That's great. This podcast is like how we get those people to the next level.
Very cool. I'll give presentations once in a while on how to give presentations. And one of the things I always run into is people say, well, I'm not like you. I don't have your personality. I don't like to present. What do you tell those people how do you tell them, yeah, it's okay, you can get better?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I think that different personalities need to work on different things. And one of my colleagues, I've collaborated with them a lot, Gavin McMahon, and his group Fast Forward Consulting, they have this amazing quiz on what's your presenter type. And you answer some questions, and then it tells you that you're one of these 6 presenter types. And each one has different strengths and weaknesses. And you can see some of them are like, Steve Jobs, who can just stand on the stage and be incredibly charismatic and, gosh, probably doesn't even need slides behind him. There are also drawbacks to his presentation style that we often don't see, but this quiz spells them all out. And then there are those of us who speaking does not come naturally, our knees are knocking, we're sweating. What does that crowd need to work on? What can they do? And what are their strengths that they can play to? So this is such a great quiz. So Google the what presenter type quiz are you, and you can find out which one you are and then what to do next. And the beautiful thing is that their point is, your slides can balance out your personality. So if your personality is like not to be funny, like if you're really scared of being humorous in your presentation, like you don't want to deliver a joke verbally, your slides can be funny. You can come up with funny visuals, or visuals that are kind of a joke that would balance that out. Not that everybody needs to use humor, that's just one example, but your slides and your personality can kind of complement each other so that they can carry you in places where you're weak.
It's a great idea. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, and that'll give people some security too as they approach it. Like they don't have to worry about all of it all at once. Just kind of want to finish up here with a 3, 2, 1. What are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to aspiring and practicing school leaders?
Okay, so 3. One is that we need to remember we're all in the business of communication. Even though you think your main business is education, it's actually communication. And so it might feel silly to be fiddling with Excel, but it's your reputation on the line. It's your school's reputation or your district's reputation. So that's why we do it, because communication is king. Number 2, people are visual beings. We are going to remember information when we see it visually versus when it's presented with narrative alone. So that is another reason why it's worth it for us to fiddle with our slides all day. And number 3, it's about more than the buttons you know how to push in PowerPoint. It's much more than that. Knowing how to do that are sort of like the logistics and the mechanics, but really it's about what happens when we change culture inside of an organization or inside of a district. When what we're doing is creating clear communication that becomes like an organizational value. And I've seen it happen many times over in the places where I work, where culture change occurs because people have started to be clear in their communication.
And it's amazing what a difference clear communication using data can have versus the obfuscation that comes with putting all the data on the screen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So what are two of the biggest rookie mistakes that you've seen new school administrators make when it comes to communication about data?
Okay, new school administrators. So one mistake is probably over-relying on academic training because, you come fresh from grad school and we're taught a very specific way to communicate, especially communicate about data in grad school. And that works for professors and scientific peers when you go to conferences. It does not work for most of the people that we have to talk to in our day-to-day life as a school administrator. And no one teaches us how to do anything any different. So that's probably one of the biggest mistakes, is just thinking that the academic training has been sufficient here. And I would say the other one is thinking that you're not good at tech. I hear it all the time, especially like the higher up in an organization where the person is, the more I hear them say, that's just not what I do. That's what my secretary does, or something like that. But that's just not an excuse in 2015. We all know how to run an iPhone. We should be able to make great graphs and great slides. So we just can't have that excuse anymore.
And you get better at it over time and more efficient.
Yes, yes, exactly. Faster too.
All right, so one thing that school leaders could start doing tomorrow that would improve their ability to communicate can be related to data or not.
I think probably spending the time to get clear on the point. Like, what's my point? What is the point I need to say about this data right here? Because when you answer that question about your point, it drives everything else. So it'll drive the type of graph that you choose. Your point becomes your title. It tells you what to emphasize inside the graph. It even gives you the answer to the best medium with which to get it out there. So thinking through what's my point is probably the best thing you could do.
Fantastic. And where can people go to learn more about you and Evergreen Data, Dr. Stephanie Evergreen?
Yes, well, certainly my site, as we said, stephanieevergreen.com, is going to be the best place to go. My blog posts in there are really informative. They've got screenshots of how to do things inside Excel. Also, I'm on Twitter at Evergreen Data. If you're on Twitter, that's where I tend to pass on great stuff I hear from other people. And I'm on Pinterest as well, where I've got some collections of really visually engaging reports and really visually engaging one-page handouts. So I have just all the cool things people send me. I've just collected them all there so that people can go around and get inspiration.
Very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And I know that this is exactly what school leaders need to pay more attention to. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders by school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. Consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And please pass the show along to your colleagues.